Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight, the FDA approves new COVID boosters. We hear from an infectious disease specialist on what you should know.
The total cost to attend a public four-year university has tripled, nearly tripled in 40 years.
With a new plan underway to alleviate student loan debt for millions of Americans, we probe some of the reasons behind the high cost of tuition.
If this commission is going to have any legitimacy, what it ought to be about is not a rubber stamp, no one wants that, but building consensus.
New oversight for the Chicago Police Department. Our Spotlight Politics team digs into that and more.
We just would like to have communication and be able to move forward.
A food pantry in Pilsen is hoping to expand inside a former church. We'll tell you about some of the obstacles they face.
Chicago public school students are back in school, but with very few black men at the head of the classroom. Hear about an effort to change that.
Especially with cultural dances, you want to make sure that you are communicating an authentic story.
And a local belly dancer shares how she's dismantling cultural appropriation in live performances like Sundays on State. But first, some of today's top stories. Classified documents were, quote, likely concealed and removed from a storage room at Mar-a-Lago as part of an effort by former President Donald Trump to obstruct the investigation into the discovery of the government records. That's according to the Justice Department. A filing late last night also shows the FBI seized boxes and containers holding more than 100 classified records during the search of Trump's Florida estate earlier this month. The filing lays out the most detailed timeline to date of the interaction between Justice Department officials and Trump representatives over the discovery of these documents. However, it does not resolve the question as to why Trump held on to the documents after his departure from the White House and why he and his team resisted repeated efforts to give them back. An update to the COVID-19 vaccine that targets today's most common Omicron strain is approved. This move from the Food and Drug Administration adjusts the recipe of both Pfizer and Moderna shots in hopes of mitigating a winter surge. Previously, the vaccines had targeted the original COVID strain. We'll hear more about this in just a few minutes. A state lawmaker has introduced a bill to try and reduce illegal street racing. State Representative LaShawn Ford of Chicago introduced a proposal to expand the state's mob action laws to include illegal street racing and other racing stunts. That would enable prosecutors to charge suspects with a Class 4 felony. It's the latest attempt by lawmakers to address drag racing. Earlier this summer, the Chicago City Council passed an ordinance to allow police to use picture and video evidence to impound parked cars that had been used in drag races. Up next, the latest on COVID-19. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The FDA is authorizing new COVID booster shots that will target the Omicron subvariants. Joining us to talk about the new vaccine and other COVID-related subjects is Dr. Robert Murphy, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Health at Northwestern University. Thanks, Dr. Murphy. Now, timing, as they say, is everything. So talk to us about the timing of these new boosters with, hate saying this out loud, fall and winter just around the corner.
Yeah, no, it's really perfect timing because it's taken them a couple months to retweak the current vaccines so that they cover the Omicron variants, BA4 and BA5. 90% of the United States is now infected with BA5. So this is really perfect timing for the upcoming flu and winter season.
And what exactly is the expectation or hope for these, that they're going to be better at preventing contracting COVID, serious illness?
Right. Remember at the beginning when the vaccines came out, it really prevented infection, as well as if you got infected, serious disease, hospitalization, and death. And then we lost the ability to prevent infection. So everybody was getting COVID, but very few people were ending up in the hospital. And we hope we can get back to something like that with this new version.
With preventing people from having to be hospitalized, but maybe also the spread?
From getting infected at all, right? Yeah, that's the hope. That's how it was at the beginning, and hopefully this new Omicron version of the vaccine. It's still a mixture of the old vaccine and the new vaccine. So it's a combination, should cover pretty much everything that we've seen so far.
And so before we move on, remind us why it is that we stopped being able to prevent infection in the first place?
Well, these RNA viruses just mutate like mad, and new variants appear, and they basically work their way around the immunology of that the vaccine gives you, the immune protection. Or if you even had an old infection, I don't know if you remember, people that got Delta last fall, then got Omicron like 2 weeks later in January, because it just that the protection you got from just having that infection or the old vaccine didn't help at all.
Unfortunately, I do remember. But speaking of, that leads me to another question. It seems like we've really gone through quite the alphabet soup of variants. So how long do we expect that this one will last, Omicron, and therefore that these boosters, this version will be effective?
No, that's a great question, because we don't really know, except this thing mutates like crazy. And just like with the flu, you would expect to see a different kind of vaccine because of these new variants that will be coming on a regular basis.
So getting back to this, for folks who are interested, ready to get that shot in their arm, how soon will they be available?
Well, the FDA approved it today. It goes to the CDC tomorrow. It's likely to be approved then. There's 170 million doses kind of ready to go in the wings. They all don't show up on one day, by the way, but they will come over the next couple of weeks. And a few doses may even be available this weekend. And then the big push rollout is going to start on Tuesday, the day after Labor Day.
So doctors' offices, pharmacies, but these aren't for everyone, only for those who've had their primary COVID vaccination series. So what else do patients need to know along those lines?
Well, so there's Pfizer and Moderna. The Moderna is approved right now, or this booster is approved for age 18 and over, and the Pfizer one is for age 12 and over. You'll see over the next couple months, as they do some more studies, especially in children, that they'll be approved for younger people as well, and children. So that's what you'll expect to see over the next few months. So
just some sort of quick answers that people might be looking for. Yeah. Could you get this if you did receive the original COVID vaccine, but not the boosters that have been available in the interim?
This just replaces the former vaccines.
So you can go ahead and get that then.
Yeah, just go ahead and get that. And if you, it's going to be, the recommendation is that you only have to wait 2 months from your last vaccine. So if you had a shot 2 months ago, you can get this booster now. And this booster is supposed to work much, much better.
What if you just had COVID?
That's a good question. So the official recommendation is to wait until your symptoms are basically completely gone, and then you can get it. But you have some immunity from that last infection, so there's no big rush. And so you can wait a month or two and get your booster at that time. There's no big hurry in that case.
As you sort of spoke about or began to earlier, these are bivalent shots. So explain, please, what exactly does that mean?
Well, it means that it's actually two different vaccines. It's the original vaccine, half of it, and half of it is the new re-engineered vaccine that's re-engineered for Omicron, BA4 and 5. So it's both of those together.
What do you say to those who might be hesitant about getting that, given that it is this new recipe, unsure that it went through appropriate FDA studying and testing?
So this technology has been given to billions, literally billions of people, billions of doses, over 12 billion doses have been given out. So we know the technology is safe. It's safer than many of the other vaccines that people have taken, especially the adenovirus vector vaccines, like the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It is incredibly safe. The change in the vaccine is really small, but it's enough to give you the immunologic kick that you need. And that's been shown in the animal studies that have been done. And you'll see the human data come out probably in about 2 months. but it's really this whole class. Like when you get your flu shot every year, that hasn't been tested either in humans. It's all re-engineered.
That's the perfect segue. Is this going to be something like receiving an annual flu shot, or even more often than that, twice a year, folks getting a COVID booster?
Well, it could be because this thing is not seasonal. You know, every time they say, "Oh yeah, the winter we're going to get all these viruses and the flu," and that's all true. But we had outbreaks last year in August and September. Now we seem to be on the downslope. But everyone's expecting with back to school and back indoors, with the weather changing, we're going to get flu and COVID and all the other seasonal viral infections.
So I expect you'll be getting that booster sooner than later, huh, Dr. Murphy?
So I'm getting it as soon as I can get it.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Robert Murphy.
Thank you, Amanda.
And now to Brandis for a look at the rising cost of higher education and its impact. Brandis.
And Amanda, tuition at public universities has nearly tripled in the last 40 years, and there are many jobs that require a college degree. That combination has more people taking on debt to pay for college. And with President Biden announcing his student loan forgiveness plan last week as a way to alleviate some of the financial burden for millions of people, it's worth understanding how college tuition reached this all-time high and what can be done to address the rising costs of obtaining a college degree. Joining us to talk about college tuition are Jennifer Delaney, Associate Professor of Education Policy, Organization, and Leadership at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Javier Reyes, Interim Chancellor at the University of Illinois Chicago and Interim Vice President of the University of Illinois System, and Lisa Castillo-Richmond, Executive Director of the Partnership for College Completion. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. So we know that research from U.S. News & World Report says that in the last 20 years, the average tuition and fees at private national universities have jumped 144%. Out-of-state tuition and fees for public universities have risen 171%. And in-state tuition and fees have risen 211%. Professor Delaney, let's start with you, please. What do you see is behind these massive increases?
So tuition increases are a little hard to nail down. We've got sort of three overarching theories that have some evidence to them about drivers of cost increases in higher education. One is talked about as being cost disease. The basic technology of teaching and learning has not really changed very much over time. We've got fancy computers and things, but you still need a professor and students, and there's a transmission of knowledge there. And to have competitive wages for faculty and other employees at universities, that tends to be a driver of costs. One of the things about universities is there's always another brilliant idea around the corner. A little extra investment can help us find a cure to cancer or send people to Mars or do all sorts of amazing things that advance the human condition. So there's this sort of insatiable appetite for more spending, and that does tend to drive costs as well. And then we've seen nationally a sort of arms race as we've had declining cohorts coming out of high school. Colleges are scrambling to get enrollments, and they're doing some consumption goods to try to make campuses really attractive. And we've seen the growth of rock climbing walls and really luxurious dining halls, and those can also be drivers of costs.
And of course, those can make the university more attractive, but they cost money. Chancellor Reyes, from your perspective, same question. What do you believe is driving this increase?
Well, I think that, as Jennifer was saying, is some of the services that we're providing to students. But I also think it's important to put into perspective that although you're talking about a certain period of time for which you have seen that increase, on the U of I system, we have frozen in-state tuition at the undergrad level for for 6 of the past 8 years. And when you look at tuition, and just focusing on UIC, over the past 10-year period, we have only increased about 5.4%. So it tells you that at UIC, we have achieved a balance between providing affordable education to our students, maintaining a balance with our research infrastructure, and maintaining the excellence of education. So I wanted to put the national numbers into perspective when it comes to the UI system.
Okay, thank you. Lisa Castillo-Richmond, we know that your organization, Partnership for College Completion, you focus on equity and access to and through higher education. What programs have been implemented in the state of Illinois to ensure affordability for low-income students?
Well, college affordability, as you point out, is a really significant issue and among the most significant issues when we talk about higher education equity. You know, the bad news is college costs were increasing from 2000 to about 2015. We've seen that the costs have plateaued and are no longer increasing, but they really remain unsustainably high for the vast majority of Illinois residents. We've seen a number of institutions, as Chancellor Reyes mentioned, that have tried to address that, but we see that state disinvestment in public higher education over the last 2 decades has resulted in these higher prices and lower enrollment rates across the state. We see now that public institutions in Illinois enroll hundreds of thousands fewer students than they did in 2010. And that is really putting our state in the wrong direction. And so what can we do about that? I mean, these are definitely, disproportionate impacts. Some of our low-income students from low-income households are paying more than 80% of their income to attend our public universities, while our highest income households are paying less than 20%. So the state is paying attention to this. We're really excited to report that. Last year, the legislature created an equitable funding commission to study how institutions are funded and at what level, to make recommendations to the legislature for an equitable, sustainable, and adequate funding formula for public universities that would put Illinois at the cutting edge of that work nationally.
So we know Illinois also has a truth in tuition law. It would require public institutions to keep tuition at the same cost throughout a student's 4 years. But Professor Delaney, you've done some research. What have you found the impact is of that law?
So truth in tuition was passed in Illinois in 2004. It does amazingly well in providing predictable tuition funding for students and families. So the rate that you pay as a freshman when you come in stays steady for the next 4 years. It, however, does not address affordability at all. And unfortunately, what we found in our research was that it was actually a driver of costs on average across states at our public four-year institutions. We saw increases in in-state tuition, on in-state required fees, out-of-state tuition. It was tied to significant declines in state appropriations, and there were decreases in both the number and the percent of out-of-state students who were enrolling. So although it's great on being predictable, it doesn't actually do very well if we measure it against affordability as a metric.
Chancellor Reyes, you mentioned earlier, of course, the system-wide freeze for a number of years recently with regards to tuition. But how do universities address enrollment and retention and balance that against the rising costs of tuition?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is recognize that sometimes our retention is affected by financials of our students. So what we've done at the system level is to provide our own financial aid for students using the institutional aid that almost matches 1-for-1 with what we get at the state and federal aid level. We are providing about $261 million in student aid within the institution across the 3 universities, and an additional $280 million in in-state and federal aid. So we're trying to combine not only what we can do institutionally with what we can do at the state and the federal aid level to really reduce the burden on our students. So we're doing our best when it comes to the resources we have, knowing that we have to maintain an excellent level of education and maintain the curiosity and the research prowess of our universities.
Lisa, what more would you like to see done to make college more affordable for those who want to attend and graduate?
Well, I would say we really need to evolve our thinking. I mean, there are certainly economic and political realities, but the problems and solutions of the past no longer work for us. I mean, to illustrate an example, among public institutions in Illinois currently, the single largest source of their operating revenue comes from students and families in the form of tuition. That, to me, is indicative of our thinking on these issues. You know, as access has expanded over time and the necessity of a college degree in so many fields could not be more clear, we have to update our thinking to stop thinking about a college degree as a private good or a luxury good and think about it instead as a public good, and we really need to treat it as such. Your family's income should not determine your ability to go to college, period. And so we need to invest in our institutions. We need to invest in them equitably so that students can choose from among the diverse ecosystem of higher education institutions in our state and they can afford it. And there are a number of things the state can do. I think increasingly they are focused on this. The legislature, the governor's office is focused on this, has taken some steps in the right direction, especially in the past legislative session and investing in our need-based aid program. But we need to keep doing that. And this is really hard work, but it's worth the investment so that everyone in Illinois who aspires to a college degree can afford one.
Professor Delaney, we've got about 30 seconds left, but the tuition increases have slowed in the last 2 years, likely pandemic related. But can we expect to bounce back upward, or are these costs going to continue to soar in the next few years?
I don't, unfortunately, see any particular mechanisms that are going to slow cost increases. I think we've been quite lucky in having some federal stimulus money that has helped us weather the pandemic. But when all of that goes away, I'm not sure what's going to be left. And what Lisa talked about with institutions being very dependent on students and families for their revenues is going to continue. So the importance of need-based aid is going to continue also. We've had an amazing investment in monetary awards program, the MAP grants, and the state. I think that will make a huge difference for low-income residents in Illinois going forward. Now, everyone who applies and is eligible for the program will receive those funds.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Professor Jennifer Delaney, Lisa Castillo-Richmond, and Chancellor Javier Reyes for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, a local food pantry and its struggle for a permanent home. Stay with us.
Much of the story of Latinos in America is that of entrepreneurship. About 5 million Latino-owned businesses currently exist in the U.S.
Predominantly Latino communities often bear the environmental burden of heavy industry. Residents of those communities say they have a hard time making their concerns heard.
A Chicago-based photographer has a personal understanding of immigration, and he has spent years documenting small businesses.
The forces of gentrification can make people being priced out of their neighborhoods feel powerless. But the founders of Lolita's Bodega say residents have more power than they think.
A food pantry in Pilsen has been operating out of a former church for the last 2 years. The founder is hoping to buy the building, but says she is running into obstacles with the Chicago Archdiocese. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez visited the pantry to learn more.
It already has carrots, onions, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn. I don't have tomatoes.
It's 10 a.m. and the Pilsen food pantry is working quickly to prepare orders. Some are filling boxes with fresh produce, while others move carts of groceries to the front of the building. For the last 2 years, the pantry has been operating out of a former Catholic church.
The bottom square is produce, and basically for every client, it's full. Like, that's what everybody takes.
Yeah.
Evelyn Figueroa is one of the founders of the Pilsen food pantry and is a family doctor in the neighborhood. She originally ran the pantry from a health clinic and in 2020 relocated inside former Holy Trinity Croatian Church.
We went from a 600 square foot space to a floor that was over 3,000 square feet. So it really gave us the space to grow into the organization that we wanted to become.
On the first floor, volunteers work to register clients. And on the second floor, people can take home clothes along with other donated necessities.
And we are walking into the clothes closet, which is a used clothing resource for the community. So a lot of the people that are getting food from the pantry just come up here and pick out some clothes while they're waiting. There's a monthly clothing allowance.
Figueroa says she wants to buy the property in hopes of expanding their services. The pantry even raised money to purchase the building and made an offer. But now she says the problem has been communicating with the Archdiocese. The last time she heard from an Archdiocese representative was in August 2021, where she says she was told she could expect a counteroffer.
We submitted a written outline, a business plan of what we wanted to do with all of the space, and it wasn't indicated to us that there was something afoul with what we had submitted. So we were handed keys 2 months later, which to me was a verbal agreement that we would be able to move forward with leasing to owning the property, and then a couple months later ran into a lot of snags with our representative from the Archdiocese.
The Pilsen Food Pantry is open 5 days a week, serving about 350 people weekly. We're told losing this space would mean they wouldn't be able to operate in the capacity they do.
I think they would have a heavy blow on the community. It's a place where people, they feel more secure knowing that we're here.
We met with Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago to learn more about the challenges organizations say they face when wanting to purchase a closed church from the Archdiocese.
We've found that lately, especially with the closure of so many churches in the Archdiocese of Chicago's books, if you will, that's even more challenging. And it's almost like the community versus a developer oftentimes.
In recent years, Mueller says the organization found more than 70 church closures, many without landmark status. Without landmark status, developers can essentially do what they want with the property.
Sometimes the historic building is given to a developer or sold to a developer, and the developer demolishes the building. We've seen this numerous times, especially in the Archdiocese in recent years, and it's really tragic because you really pulverize the story.
Dr. Figueroa says her goal is to renovate and build a center for the East Pilsen community, a place she says can provide crucial resources for those facing food insecurity, homelessness, and poverty.
We're willing to permanently change the zoning or make a public agreement or declaration that the building will never be sold for profit.
As they try to create a foundation, Figueroa says the lack of communication is leaving employees and volunteers in the dark, wondering if the Archdiocese supports their mission to serve.
The community seems to want us to be in this space, and we would like to pay an honest amount of fair market value for the facility. We just would like to have communication and be able to move forward.
I'm Joanna Hernandez for Chicago Tonight.
WTTW News reached out to Chicago's Archdiocese, and in a statement, a spokesperson tells us in part, St. Procopius Parish has not finalized plans for the former Holy Trinity Croatian Parish campus. The food pantry will be alerted when there are more specific plans, and they will have the opportunity to discuss their interests further at that time. In the meantime, the Archdiocese says the pantry is operating rent-free. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, Republican candidate for governor Darren Bailey gets a cash infusion, while the BGA has questions about Governor Pritzker's blind trust. Our Spotlight Politics team has it covered. Chicago public school students are back in school, but with very few black men at the head of the classroom. Hear about an effort to change that.
Especially with cultural dances, you want to make sure that you are communicating an authentic story.
And a local belly dancer shares how she's dismantling cultural appropriation in live performances, like at Sundays on State. But first, some more of today's top stories. White Sox manager Tony La Russa is out indefinitely due to an unspecified health issue. La Russa will be undergoing tests on his heart and is scheduled to fly out to Phoenix to see doctors this week, according to a report from USA Today. The 77-year-old missed last night's game on his doctor's recommendation. La Russa is in the second season of his second managerial stint with the team and seemingly under a lot of stress during a disappointing run, with many fans calling for him to be fired. Bench coach Miguel Cairo will continue to serve, that is, as acting manager while La Russa is out. Workers at the Galewood Hostess Factory say Black and LGBTQ staff face a pattern of segregation, hostility, and double standards. Here's what one former worker has to say about it.
LGBTQ workers endure a hostile environment. Supervisors insulted me to co-workers, as you will hear. Other times it took the form of gossip that was indulged in by supervisors. This is too bad because Hostess has made all these corporate promises about diversity and anti-racism.
Workers say after a rash of terminations since June, they've filed grievances, sent letters, and met with local and corporate Hostess officials without resolution. Now they say they've filed an Equal Opportunity Commission charges against Hostess. The company told the Chicago Tribune it had not received an EEOC filing and declined to comment. Conservationists are celebrating what they say is a big win in Northwest Barrington. The Duchessois family, who formerly owned Arlington Park, sold their almost 250-acre Hillendale Farm South property to Citizens for Conservation. The group will turn the property into the Hillendale Preserve to ensure the land's protection as an open space. A concept map of the site shows a mix of prairie, savanna, and marsh habitat, which will support native plant and aquatic communities, grassland birds, and wildlife that originally occupied the land. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And of course, don't go anywhere. More aldermen join the City Hall exodus. CPD announces a new time-off policy, and Darren Bailey gets a cash infusion, and Governor Pritzker's investments under scrutiny. All subjects for our Spotlight Politics team to chew on. Here with all of that and more are Amanda Vinicky and Heather Sharon. Welcome back, both of you. So let's start with 44th Ward Alderman Tom Tunney. He's become the 6th alderman to announce that he will not seek re-election. Seems like it's something that's going around, Amanda. And it seems like a lot. Is this level of turnover unusual?
It is uncommon. You think of the Chicago City Council as a place where people can and do stay for life, where it's difficult even to be challenged and to be unseated. But by the way, it's not just 6. You do have 6, Tunney among them, that say that they are leaving for what is really amounted to personal reasons. But then you have more, and Tunney could be moved to this camp, that are leaving instead to run for another office, namely that of mayor, trying to challenge Lightfoot. Then you already have Alderman Cardenas, who won a seat elsewhere, so he's leaving and he has another job lined up. And then you have another 2 alder people who were won an office in 2019 and won't be running again, but they're not quite open seats because they've already moved on and have replacements who are ostensibly going to be running as somewhat semi-incumbents.
So Heather, Tunney is the chair of the City Council's powerful zoning committee. Why would he give up that perch, and do we know if he's got plans to run for another office?
Well, Alderman Tunney didn't answer questions after his announcement this week, and that is what everybody wants to know. It is hard to overstate how unusual it is for an alderperson to serve just one term as chair of the very powerful zoning committee, which really gives him a significant amount of control over what is built throughout the city, not just in his North Side ward. I just want to make one correction to what Amanda said. Alderman George Cardenas still has to win in November to take his seat on the Cook County Board of Review, although we do expect him to do so in a district that has a majority of Democratic voters, and that will give Mayor Lori Lightfoot another opportunity, potentially, to appoint his replacement before the election, giving him or her a leg up.
Yeah, there's been a lot of appointments going on lately for folks who are leaving even before their terms are up, before the election. Police Superintendent David Brown, though, announcing a new policy that will guarantee officers at least 1 day off a week. Previously, both the mayor and Brown, they had defended the city's policy of canceling days off for officers when necessary to ensure public safety. Here's what Mayor Lightfoot had to say on Monday.
You know, we know that we've got to make sure that there is a process by which officers have time off. Tired, emotionally wrought officers, not good for them, not good for their families, and not good, frankly, for the community members that they're serving. So there's been
Heather, what prompted this change in policy?
Well, Mayor Lightfoot is running for re-election, and she has faced an outcry of criticism from people on the city council like Alderman Matt O'Shea, who introduced a measure that would have required David Brown to do pretty much this, to make sure officers got at least 1 day off every week. And it was clear that this outcry wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, especially as the police department is still struggling to really tamp down a significant surge in violence in areas of the city that is not accustomed to seeing that type of violence.
And also, we know this policy change, it came the day after a report from the Inspector General that said that during a time period she examined back in the spring, almost 1,000 officers had worked 11 or more consecutive days. Amanda, does this policy change have anything to do with, the spate of officer suicides that we've seen, including 3 in July?
Brandis, it has to do very much, I think, with both of the things that you just cited. First of all, you have in writing a report that really shows how big of a problem this is. It's one thing to talk about it, to hear anecdotes. It is another for that to be presented in a report from the Inspector General, the number of hours and how often this is happening. And then, yes, as you noted, certainly the mental health of police officers who are encountering violence and then who don't have a break to deal with whatever family stress is, whatever chores and things hearings are mounting up as they're continually dealing with a job that, by the way, is stressful, and oftentimes you have officers that might be fearful of their lives. That is something that the police department needed to do something about, getting, as Heather noted, a lot of pressure from older people as well as the public.
So,
and the FOP.
Jump in to say that we also learned that the city has really been incapable of hiring more mental health clinicians, which was really a centerpiece of the mayor's 2022 budget to address that mental health need of officers. There are only 9 clinicians staffed of 22 police districts, and that is far fewer than the mayor promised just a little more than a year ago.
And gets back also to an issue of not being able to hire and retain officers. CPD, this is something that a lot of police departments are experiencing nationally as well.
Absolutely. So Mayor Lightfoot has finally, though, named 7 Chicago residents to an interim commission overseeing the Chicago Police Department. This is, of course, the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability. Heather, tell us why this took so long.
Well, that's a good question, and it's not clear to me exactly what the choke points were. Every deadline set in the ordinance that was passed in July of 2021 was missed. This commission was supposed to have taken office 8 months ago. Instead, it will start tomorrow, September 1st. And it is really sort of the last piece of the reforms that were demanded in the wake of the police murder of Laquan McDonald all the way back in 2014. And it is designed to build trust in the police department by giving regular people, civilians, a say in the police department's policy and a say in who should lead the various agencies that are in charge of policing in Chicago.
And Heather, quickly remind us why we're talking about an interim commission here.
Well, it is now, so the permanent commission will be made up of people elected to represent each of those 22 police districts. So when people go to the polls in February, they will not only potentially elect a new alderperson, they'll also be asked to elect district council members. Those district council members will in turn nominate 7 people that will go to the city council and the mayor for confirmation, and they will be in charge of policing citywide. This is a grand experiment, and it is not clear exactly how it's going to work, but it is a new era of policing in Chicago.
It's something we'll all be watching for sure. So getting to the governor's race, an investigation by the Better Government Association has found that the blind trust set up to manage our billionaire governor's vast wealth has made investments in a health insurance company that benefited from decisions made by the governor. BGA says that this shows a potential conflict of interest. Amanda, what do you make of this?
What I make of this is, first of all, that this is the second governor in a row where this has been an issue, because you have these uber wealthy individuals winning office, and so they have these blind trusts. And by the way, there is no such law. Any notion of a blind or semi-blind, as the BGA would argue, is a voluntary measure that the governor is taking to try and ward off any sort of questions about the conflict of interest that there may be. Pritzker, by the way, saying this is much ado about nothing, and that these meetings with Centene, that Medicaid company that you talked about, were just sort of the meetings that he has all the time with corporations that do business in Illinois and need to meet with the governor, that he didn't even pay attention to it. He is so wealthy that one would think you don't need to worry about any sort of profits, but there certainly are questions, because the governor has not, did not come forward with all of the financial statements with the BGA, and journalists throughout the years have requested.
Meanwhile, what have Republicans said, Amanda?
Well, Republicans haven't really said a ton. They did send something out that basically quoted the BGA story. There has been a lot made of the governor's wealth by his Republican opponent, State Senator Darren Bailey, talking about, the governor having soft hands that mean that he doesn't know the meaning of hard work. But in a way, the GOP is in a difficult place with this, because guess who hasn't released his own tax returns, or even portions of them, as Pritzker has done? Well, that is Darren Bailey.
All right, we're going to come back to him in a little bit. So after the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, Governor Pritzker said that he planned to call the Illinois General Assembly into a special session to pass expanded abortion protections. It has not happened yet. Here's what the governor said about that yesterday.
There are 2 things that you have to consider. One is there is a legislature. The legislature has to do its work, and it is hard at work. Second, that, as you know, in special session, when things need to be passed with a supermajority, That's harder than doing it with a simple majority. So there are some things that can be done and could be done with a supermajority, some things that take a simple majority. So again, the legislature is working through all those things.
So Heather, is this special session going to happen?
Well, it is not looking likely, and time is ticking. We are getting closer and closer to that November general election when statewide offices are on the ballot and people want to be in their districts running for re-election in the few contested General Assembly races. But overall, I think the issue is that Illinois is already sort of a state that has laws on the books to ensure abortion access. So anything that the General Assembly would do would be not sweeping. And when you get into sort of the nitty-gritty details about how Illinois should cope with the influx of women coming to Illinois for reproductive health care, I think it's difficult. And it is especially difficult, as you heard the governor said, you've got to basically have everybody on board. And in an election year, it can be hard to get people to agree that dogs are awesome and apple pie is yummy.
But it is. Which I think we can all agree on here, right? Here at Spotlight Politics. Okay, said we'd come back to Bailey and his money. Amanda, conservative mega donor Richard Uihlein has donated $1 million to the Republicans' campaign for governor. Despite that contribution, though, Bailey's campaign fund is dwarfed by that of the billionaire we were just talking about a minute ago. Amanda, how much of a difference is Uihlein's money going to make in this race?
Little to none. That is not going to go far if Bailey has any sort of chance to really connect, particularly in Chicago, where there's the population, the Chicago, the suburbs, where he needs to connect. He's well known enough downstate. That costs a lot of money to go up on air. Pritzker, I believe, has something like $60 million, so $1 million isn't going to go far. It is, however, telling. People were sort of wondering, where is Dick Uihlein? He is the big funder of the GOP and of Bailey, so why hasn't he come through for him as he did in the primary?
Now, in Chicago, we're obviously in something of a Democratic bubble here, but how would you say the Bailey campaign is doing, and how much support is he attracting in the rest of the state?
So we don't have a ton of polling available, but we know that this is going to be uphill for him from the onset. His lieutenant governor candidate is from Chicago and has tried to sort of make some headway here. We have a new proposal from Bailey as well, dealing with the cost of in the number of Illinois students that are admitted to the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So we're seeing him try, but it's going to be tough, particularly without that cash.
Couple of months away. Thanks to Amanda Vinicky and Heather Sharon.
Thank you.
Up next, a move to increase the number of black male teachers in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. But first, a look at the weather. For Chicago public school students, it's possible to go from kindergarten to high school and never have a black man as a teacher. According to CPS data, fewer than 4% of CPS teachers are black men. And in a school district where 36% of students are black, that is a striking imbalance. Nationwide, the figure is even lower, just 2%. Last fall, 3 Chicago high schools instituted a pilot program to address that imbalance. The Intro to Urban Education curriculum is designed to encourage young black and Latino men to envision themselves at the head of the class. Joining us with more on how it works are Mila Kumpalova, who reported on the pilot program for Chalk Beat Chicago, Troy LaRaviere, head of the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association, and Iona Calhoun-Batiste, Senior Director of Programs at Thrive Chicago, which administers the program. Thanks to all 3 of you for joining us. Iona Calhoun-Batiste, let's start with you, please. Why is it so important to have black men at the head of Chicago's classrooms, particularly for young black students, for black boys?
Thank you so much. It's particularly important for young black males to see themselves reflected in the everyday teachings and learnings so that they can feel more empowered, more aligned, and welcomed into an actual educational system. And what we've seen and what we know is that historically there have been fewer and fewer black male educators that have been taking the helm and that have been really stepping into the role of being an educator to provide that role model, guidance, and inspirational hope to our young Black and Latino boys in our schools.
Of course. So, Mila Kumpalova, you talked to a student, Khalil, who is part of this pilot program. What did he tell you about why he joined the program?
Sure. I met Khalil at Diet High School, where the overwhelming majority of students are Black and low income. He was one of the students in the Intro to Urban Education class there. And he was somebody who had gone into the class feeling that a career in education might really be for him. And he spoke about the impact that the two Black male teachers he had had during his time in CPS had had on him. His sense of really being able to connect with them and the sense that they saw him and understood him more fully than other educators could at times.
Troy LaRaviere, why don't we see more Black male teachers?
I love these programs you're talking about, but I prefer to look at it from a root cause analysis. It's like looking at a corporation with an epidemic of sexual harassment and saying, why don't we see more women here? Without dealing with the fact that there's an epidemic of sexual harassment, we have to look at there's an epidemic of systemic racism in CPS. CPS is on record, exposed by WBEZ, if I remember correctly, of weeding out, having a program to weed out Black teachers until it was exposed and they had to get rid of it. They created a program similar to that to weed out Black and Latino principals that still exists today called the Principal Eligibility Policy. You look at the difference in investment in curriculum offered in schools where the students are majority middle class and white versus what curriculum and investments are in schools that are attended by Black students. Look at Harriet Tubman School in Lindblom and what's happening to their Black principals right now versus what CPS did to the white principal at Jones. With the white principal at Jones, they did what they were supposed to do and handled it properly. They handled the Black principals at Tubman and Lindblom as if they were guilty before even investigated. So if I'm a student and I see this, I experience this inequity in curriculum, I see how Black men and Black women are treated when they become educators by this district.
Well,
who's more likely to become an educator?
And of course, before you moved over to the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association, you were a principal. Before that, you were a teacher. What was it that made you want to get into the teaching profession at the time that you did?
My girlfriend, who's now my wife and mother of my son. I was in the Navy and I didn't want to do college. I didn't want to I didn't want to do anything involving where I had to go to college. I didn't think I'd be successful. But my girlfriend, who went to Whitney Young, who went to the University of Illinois, when I got out of the Navy, she made me go to college. And then I read the autobiography of Malcolm X and was extremely inspired by that. And once I did really well in college, I looked at my experience as a CPS student and thought, I almost didn't go to college. What was it about my experience in CPS that made me have such a low assessment of myself? Here I am with straight A's at the University of Illinois and thought I'd fail out. What was it about CPS that gave me this low assessment of myself? So I decided to become a teacher so that I could go into CPS and change it for other students who didn't have the Margaret, that's my wife's name, Margaret, that I had. And then I realized it's not about just teachers. There's a systemic thing happening here that I had to address, which is why I eventually took the path that led me to the presidency of this association.
Okay, so of course, that's one success story. Not every student is going to have that. Iona, would you give us an idea of what the Intro to Urban Education curriculum looks like?
Sure. It consists of 8 units. And let me just go back and say that this curriculum was created by administrators, educators, community partners, individuals who have expertise in education. And so this curriculum is broken into 8 different units in which it takes students through a general understanding of who they are, their history, background, content, and understanding of Chicago, understanding of Chicago communities, and then it very specifically goes into understanding the school system and school environments, how one is able to use knowledge to execute power, to inspire others, etc. The best thing about this curriculum that I find is going to be really fun this year is that young men are going to be able to steward and have and run their own classrooms for at least 2 to 3 weeks this year. And so we're really excited in seeing those that want to step up to the challenge, and how they feel before they instruct a classroom of younger peers, and then how they feel afterwards. It will really be telling to us.
A little bit of early student teaching, it sounds like. Mila, how did the pandemic underscore the need for more Black male teachers?
We here at Chalkbeat Chicago have done quite a bit of reporting over the past couple of years on the pandemic's disproportionate impact on Black and Latino boys and young men, really widening disparities in attendance, grades, college enrollment, and other outcomes that were already some of the widest historically, both here in Chicago and nationally. So we, as part of that reporting, try to follow up and really look at what are some of the solutions, what are ways that school systems can address this disproportionate impact, and this idea of bringing in more male teachers of color and really stepping up efforts to also retain them once schools hire them was really coming up again and again and again.
Iona, what can schools do for their Black students now that will allow them to see teaching as a future possibility for them?
Think about the system and the environments in which they're creating. Making sure that we have young Black males that see themselves, that have role models there in the schools. Having an opportunity for males of color to talk about things that are happening in their community, and then showing them the pathways forward, right? Everyone is not going to be an educator, and we understand that. But everyone should have a pathway forward after they matriculate and graduate through high school. And we hope that our curriculum does that.
Troy, we've got 30 seconds. What role do principals play in hiring teachers, and how can principals help with recruiting more?
I think that principals play a key role. I think principals play a key role in hiring teachers. And they have to cast a broad net, but principals and all stakeholders have to get involved in helping to determine the political leadership that creates the inequities that they have to work against. We don't want to have to work against these inequities in order to bring these folks. We want these inequities gone, and that means a mayor, a school board, and a CEO that actually believes in Black and brown children.
Okay, a lot of work to do. My thanks to the three of you for joining us: Mila Kumpalova, Iona Calhoun-Batiste, and Troy LaRaviere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
For a few Sundays over the summer, Chicago residents get to see a takeover of an iconic downtown street. It's part of the Chicago Loop Alliance's second annual Sundays on State. Arts correspondent Angel Ito recently caught up with a few of this year's performing acts to share how this South Loop event is celebrating the city.
From Monroe to Lake, Sundays on State brings the city of neighborhoods to one central location to showcase the best of what the city has to offer.
Sundays on State is free and open to the public. We close State Street, the most iconic street in Chicago, and it's to create free and public programming in the Loop. And we wanted to bring joy, for one, back to the heart of the city, also to support the businesses that are here on State Street.
What started as a way to accelerate the economy after the pandemic has since transformed into a free celebration showcasing local vendors and performers. Meet Azima, the Bollywood belly dancer. As a South Asian American with parents from Pakistan, she found belly dancing as a way to connect with her culture growing up in Kansas City.
I dance with a group called Ritual Rhythms Chicago, and what we've been trying to bring through our performances is that intercultural connection to dance and music.
She's working to not only celebrate her heritage, but address cultural appropriations as well.
There are some tropes and things. People think very much, Aladdin and Jasmine, and those kinds of imageries come to mind for people. Once they see that there's so much more to the Middle East and South Asia, that those are different regions, and they have a lot of cultural dances, which we try to present in our different showcases, then they get to see that there's a culture behind it, there's real people from where it comes, and it's not exactly what they thought it was, but it's a lot more engaging. Most of the time we get people up and maybe teach them a move or two and get them engaged, and people seem to really enjoy that way of dismantling those assumptions.
From community theater to jazz vocalists to Irish dancers.
It's so amazing getting to have everyone out after such a long time of not being able to do that. And yeah, we also love that it brings in all of these different performing arts groups from so many different cultures.
We hope that Sundays on State is a little bit of all your street festivals in one here. We are a city of neighborhoods, but the Loop wants to be everyone's neighborhood.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Sundays on State runs from Monroe to Lake, with the final takeover happening this Sunday. Visit our website for more information on who you can expect to see to perform. Now back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.